another historical fiction author chat. And today, my guest and friend is Ellen Keith, author of The Dutch Wife and now The Dutch Orphan. Can I see that cover? You have that beautiful cover there?
Yes, here is Canadian version, and I have the hardcover US version with me as well,
So,
both coming out on the same day.
congratulations. I'm
Thank
so
you.
excited to have you here. Thank you for coming. Everyone's going to now have to go out and get this book. I did put the to buy link on there so you can all go out there and get it. And you're going to love it because I did. It was beautiful. I think I wrote a little blurb for it even. I think so. Okay, so I'm going to read the bio and synopsis, and then it's over to Ellen. Hang on a second. Let me get organized here. All right. Okay, there it is. So Ellen's bio. Winner of the HarperCollins UBC Prize for Best New Fiction, Ellen Keith is a Canadian writer and graduate of the University of British Columbia's MFA program in creative writing. Previously, she completed an undergraduate degree in history with a focus on World War II Holocaust studies at the University of Alberta. She lives in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. Her work has appeared in publications such as the New Quarterly and the Globe and Mail, and her debut novel, The Dutch Wife, which I love, and it's on my shelf, but I just didn't want to get it down to confuse anybody. It reached #1 on the Globe and Mail bestsellers list, and we love when that happens. Ellen is originally from St. Albert, Alberta, which I'm going to just let you all know is about 45 minutes from where I'm sitting right now, and I didn't even realize that, so that's kind of cool. In her early 20s, she traded in her office cubicle for a camera and a backpack and set off alone on a 10-month trip across Europe and South America, which set the stage for a long-term move. Her maternal grandparents are Dutch, and she's always felt at home in the Netherlands, so there was no question in her mind about settling in Amsterdam. After several years working at a nonprofit organization, she's turning her full attention to writing, which is scary and the best. She loves dancing salsa. She speaks Dutch and Spanish. She's traveled to over 50 countries, making me green with envy, and she can't go a day in Amsterdam without cycling. Wow, that's what I've heard. I would have to. My husband's a big e-bike enthusiast. I wonder if he would do that too. All right.
E-bikes are all over the place now, ripping past me as I slowly pedal into the city.
You have to have a separate lane. All right, The Dutch Orphan. Amsterdam, 1941. When the Nazis invade Amsterdam, singer Johanna Vos watches in horror as her Jewish friends are forbidden from performing with her on stage, and the vibrant music scene she loves is all but erased. Johanna helps organize the artist resistance. Sorry, my mouth's not working. The artist resistance, an underground network that arranges for Jewish musicians to perform at house concerts hosted by their allies. When Johanna is told about a Jewish orphan who is headed for deportation, she does not think twice. She takes the baby in as her own, hiding the truth from everyone, including her sister, Liesbeth. Meanwhile, Liesbeth de Wit finds herself torn between her sister and her failing marriage. She knows Johanna is an ally of the resistance, while her husband actively supports the Dutch Fascist Party. As the sisters navigate the ongoing Nazi occupation, they find themselves growing further and further apart. And when another charming member of the Dutch Fascist Party sets his eyes on Liesbeth, her predicament only deepens. As the war unfolds, secrets continue to grow between the sisters, severing their once unbreakable bond. Eventually, both women are forced to make a choice that will alter their lives forever, the choice between family and freedom. And I love how you did this, like how you ended the book, because the whole way through I was thinking, oh no, she's never going to be able to fix that. Holy smokes. But all right, I'm going to get off the screen here so everybody can watch Ellen. Thank you again for being here, and let's hear you.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. It is a pleasure to be here. So I'm going to read from the very beginning. I have a prologue that opens the book before we jump ahead in time. So we start off with Johanna Vos as the narrator, and it opens on May 10th, 1940, in Zierikzee, the Netherlands. They say that if a stork flies overhead on your wedding day, you'll be blessed with a child within the year. On the day of her wedding, my younger sister rose with the birds and turned her gaze skyward. It was a crisp spring morning, the type that scatters dew across the dikes. A heavy stillness filled the dawn. Liesbeth perched in the alcove of our childhood bedroom, trying to summon shapes from shadows as a dusty pink glow gave way to sunlight. The neighbor's cows still crowded in the barn, waiting to be milked, and the sky was empty. I watched her crane her neck until her nose was pressed to the window pane. Let's hope Maurits isn't relying on a bird to fill your house with children, I teased. Liesbeth blushed. Any luck helps. She stood up and we started to get ready, dusting our cheeks with rouge and molding our chestnut hair into soft waves. While she pinned her barrette, I opened the wardrobe and retrieved the hanger with the wedding dress, lifting the hem and twirling around with it in a circle. Well, Lies, are you ready? The dress was gorgeous, Liesbeth's own creation. I traced a finger over the folds of satin, the gathers that tapered to a fitted waist. You've outdone yourself. Nobody in Zeeland has a dress like this. It's as if you stole it straight from the pages of Libelle magazine. Maybe I ought to parade around town first to make all the other girls a tad jealous, she said. I knew she'd sat in the back room of the tailor's shop for evenings on end, sewing on the gown's covered buttons one by one, fantasizing about the day she would give up the job to become Maurits's wife. I paused, listening to the comforting sounds of our aunt, Tante Rika, making breakfast downstairs. It felt like it had throughout all those years we'd lived with our aunt and uncle, up until I'd moved to Amsterdam with my husband, Willem. And now here was Liesbeth, following in my footsteps. Are you sure you're ready to leave Zierikzee? I asked. It's not too late to find you a strong farmer who would keep you nice and plump. Liesbeth laughed and shimmied out of her nightgown. I'll happily trade in this dull life for parties and dress shops and nights at the cinema with the man of my dreams. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. While I tried to bite my tongue in the weeks leading up to their wedding, she could read me better than anyone. And although Willem had known Maurits since their early days at university, a part of me regretted introducing her. In the 2 years I'd known him, Maurits had changed. He seemed intent on climbing his way up in the world 2 rungs at a time, regardless of where that ladder was leading. I'd even heard him praise Hitler's policies in Germany, as if he'd forgotten the dictator was busy terrorizing Poland and silencing his own people. Maurits preached of nationalism and economic prosperity like that rat-faced Goebbels was sitting on his shoulder. Liesbeth looked down at the floor. You'll give him a proper chance, won't you? I nodded, because what else could I do? I didn't want to dash my sister's hopes on her wedding day. I forced a smile and pointed to the girdle she was putting on. Maurits might send you right back if you try to seduce him in that prissy old thing. Tell me that's not what you're planning on wearing tonight. Her cheeks flushed scarlet. I reached into the bottom drawer of the wardrobe and produced a package wrapped in colored paper. Inside was a light peach chemise that seemed to be made of air. I winked. Don't tell Tante Rika. She thanked me and slipped it over her head. Then I helped her into the dress, looping button after button through the tiny holes. I'd missed this ritual of getting ready together, the coolness of my sister's skin when I fastened her necklace or adjusted a hat pin. During my first months in Amsterdam, Liesbeth had visited often enough that her absence had felt temporary. I tried to imagine what it would be like to have her there in the city, living only a few minutes away by bicycle. Look at you, I said, guiding her to the mirror. The dress hugged her body in a way that suited her, equally flattering and modest. Lies had always been the girlish one. Perhaps my features were more defined, my cheekbones higher, my hair more eager to curl. But today, with our mother's lily-shaped ear baubles and those layers of satin, she looked like a true lady. You're radiant, I said. Soon, someone knocked at the door. Our brother, Gerrit, poked his head in. Your beau has arrived. He looked Liesbeth up and down. Sorry, I guess I have the wrong room. I'm looking for my sister, lanky as a flagpole, likes to tip cows at night, and dumb as a pig's rear end. You seen her? Liesbeth slapped him playfully on the sleeve and took one last look in the mirror to fix her hair. No more cow tipping for me. From now on, it's the big city life. He grinned. I'm proud of you. Maurits is a lucky man. When we went downstairs, Maurits was waiting in the entrance. His outfit looked overpriced, with gold links adorning his French cuffs, and every hair on his head was sculpted into place with a perfection that was almost disconcerting. But when he saw Liesbeth, he beamed with such love, so I hoped with everything in my being that I had misjudged him. Our relatives arrived at the front gate in a cacophony of bicycle bells. They cheered and whooped and called Liesbeth's name. A crunch of tires on gravel followed as Maurits's family pulled up to the house in a shiny automobile. City folk, Omkor mumbled. He straightened his tie and went to greet the guests. Our uncle was a strange sight in his old suit, the one he normally saved for funerals. It hung long in the sleeves, dwarfing his hands, but perhaps he liked it that way, so the new in-laws couldn't see the deep lines of yard work that creased his palms. The wedding ceremony at the town hall was short and simple. We sat on plush chairs in a room with rococo paneling and gilded portraits of Zeeland's forefathers. Liesbeth clutched her bouquet of pink peonies, and when she said her I do's, Willem passed me his handkerchief before I knew I needed it. A warm feeling overcame me, but I was also conscious that a small part of me had split off and was floating away. We returned to the house, where the long table in the garden had been set and reset so many times, soup spoons repolished and the vases of tulips rearranged, that even the cows had begun to stare. They peered wide-eyed over the neighbor's fence, while Tante Rika clanged pans together to chase them away. Everyone sat down for lunch, roast with buns, a cheese platter, herring from the fisherman down the road. Maurits's family kept remarking how lovely and quaint everything was, how it felt like a departure from reality. Omkor bristled and stared at his shoes. The sky began to cloud over and a flock of swallows flew by. Liesbeth's head shot up, so I winked at her from down the table. No stork, not yet. Maurits rose, clearing his throat. I'd like to make a toast, he said, to my beautiful bride. I have no doubt we'll grow old and wise together, with a charming brood of children nestled on our laps. He raised his glass. There are great forces at work in the world. May today mark the beginning of a prosperous new stage in our lives together. At the behest of the guests, the married couple kissed. Willem pushed up the brim of his horn-rimmed glasses with his middle finger and leaned over to whisper in my ear. He had to slip the word prosperous in, didn't he? Let's hope he puts Liesbeth's happiness above all that, I said. When the toast finished and the dishes were cleared, my turn came. I felt that familiar prickle of nerves when I got up and pushed back my chair. Willem gave me a kiss for good luck, and I got up to join the trio of musicians I'd invited as a surprise. We gathered in the corner by the magnolia tree. Liesbeth clasped her hands together. Please tell me you're going to perform. The bassist tuned his instrument and counted us in. I breathed deep into my diaphragm and started to sing. The musicians played beautifully, the sounds carrying on the breeze that rustled the fields. Liesbeth's eyes brimmed with tears of joy, which gave me a rush of sisterly love. Even if her heart now belonged to someone else, I knew she would always be there for me. The song came to an end, and Liesbeth jumped to her feet, calling for an encore. We launched into another number. Then, in the distance, something rumbled, low and loud, like a hornet. My brother looked up, and I followed his gaze. An airplane crossed the sky, heading out over the sea. Another followed, and then another. Liesbeth signaled for the musicians to play louder, unwilling to permit any intrusions on her perfect wedding day. Maurits leaned in to stroke her cheek. The rumbling grew louder until I stumbled over the lyrics and the musicians fell out of tune. Look, Gerrit said. One by one, we turned our heads to where he was pointing. There, on the horizon, were those same threatening aircraft flying in formation. But they were no longer traveling westward toward the English Channel. No, the planes had turned around. That V that guided their approach pointed eastward, back inland, straight toward us. A feeling passed over the garden, like we could see our whole world falling apart. Guests got up from the table, voices raised in alarm. Maoist was the only one who stayed seated, appearing strangely calm. I locked eyes with Lies and moved back to stand beside her. The planes roared louder before passing overhead, black marks against the cloudy sky.
Oh, beautiful. Hang on a second. I'm coming there. What a beautiful scene you painted there, and the closeness with the sisters. Everyone's gonna love this because everything you just felt there with the two sisters and the closeness and how much she was gonna miss it. And, oh boy, Ellen's gonna twist your heart with this one. It's great. That was beautiful. Thank you so much. And don't worry about the sunshine. I was going to tell everybody here. We're battling the sun. It's really funny because today's the 18th. Today's release day, big day. But for me, it's morning. Sun's just coming up. For Ellen, it's evening or early evening, and it's just going down. So we're battling the sun. But I think you look lovely, so don't worry about that. So let's talk about this book. I know that it is a sequel. Sort of like it's a companion, not a sequel. And I'm going to change what I said before, and I'm going to, so you guys would have read this because I showed this to you when it came out. And it's not the same, but it's connected. So how did you get inspired to write this one?
Well, there was so much that happened in the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands, and I feel like the first novel was so focused on here. I'm going to see if I can move a little bit out of the sun. The first novel was so focused on what was happening in the concentration camps that I didn't really get to explore what was happening back in the Netherlands. And I feel like it's one of the countries that's not talked about as much for a variety of reasons, but I really wanted to take a look at what was happening there. And one thing that I find really interesting when comparing World War II novels from one side of the ocean to the other is how different the narrative around the fiction can be. So I find that in the Netherlands, because the Dutch lived through the occupation, there's a lot of nuance and a lot of ambiguity, moral ambiguity in how some of these stories are told. There's a great reluctance to have a clear-cut story of heroism, because the reality is there was so much going on in the occupation, and to speak of real true heroes is maybe a bit misleading, especially if we look at the actual numbers of how many people were involved in the Dutch resistance. So I really wanted to try to bring some of that nuance across the ocean and really explore sort of the range of reactions that you have to the German invasion. We all know the stories of resistance heroes who were saving lives, but there was a lot more going on that was affecting the lives of people every day. So we have some people who really just kept pushing on with their daily life and maybe were a little indifferent or afraid to do something brave, to try to take a stand. We have some people who were outright collaborating with the Germans for personal gain, or maybe because they supported the Nazi policy. So I really wanted to try to explore all of this spectrum and try to, I'll add a little more gray area to some of the way that we're talking about the occupation.
I love that. And that's sort of, we try to step away once in a while and get a bigger view, and you never know what you're gonna see when that happens. I was loving also that you opened it up with music, because I know you have the Jewish characters that were involved in the music and what happens with them over the duration, but I'm a big fan of classical music, so for you to open up that way really connected me. So you did all this work living in Amsterdam, right? Was the research different because you were right there and in the museums and in with the people? And what was your research like?
Well, first of all, I was doing most of the novel writing and the research during lockdown. So that immediately posed some problems because most of the museums and the archives and everything were closed for a lot of the time I was working on the novel. So that created quite a few limitations. Fortunately, so much is online. And as soon as the war archives opened up in Amsterdam, I was right there in line signing up to be in their reading room. And they have just a multitude of resources there, old newspapers, diaries, a lot of secondary sources as well. So that was really valuable for me. But a lot of it was just inspired from walking and cycling around the city. And I think when you live here, you become very aware of how much living history there is. So many of the buildings that were used as German headquarters during the war have now been converted maybe into schools or office buildings. So I went to a lot of those places, and I stood there and I tried to imagine what it was like. I mapped out sort of the route that my characters would be taking as they're cycling across the city. I actually have the characters, Liesbeth, in where she's living in the novel is the house I was living at the time I started writing the book. And the character Johanna is living in another house that I briefly lived in Amsterdam. So it was very much taking my own experience of the city and trying to connect it to what was going on in the 1940s. And there's just so much information out there and so many signs of the war that you can still see around the city that it wasn't too hard. I didn't have to look far to get that.
Yeah, that would give you a real deep insight. So were any of the characters based on anyone that you know or stories that you'd heard or?
There's a lot of characters whose activities in the novel are inspired by real things. I think everything I pulled more or less comes from some stories. It's a blend of experience. So for example, at one point Johanna gets arrested and then I don't want to give away too much, but what follows after that is loosely based on the experiences of Mona Parsons, who was a Canadian woman in the Dutch resistance. So I found a lot of inspiration in what she went through and her bravery and resourcefulness in trying to get herself back to safety.
Right. And I don't want to give away too much, but there was a story that you told me just before this. There is there's a there's a Jewish baby at one point that comes into the story. And there was a thing where there were a few of these Jewish babies that were passed to people for safety. And you met somebody that said they knew or they were part of that.
Yeah, there's actually quite a few stories around the Netherlands. It happened, I mean, there were numerous instances of this happening where you have, as say, maybe as a couple or a mother whose husband has already been deported, you have a child, and it's very risky to take an infant into hiding with you because you can't really control when the baby's going to cry. And in many cases, these people were hiding in houses, in sort of attics or side hidden compartments in someone's house. And you need to be very careful that you're dead silent during the day. So in some cases, people were forced to separate from their children. And sometimes the children went into hiding, say, on a farm in the north of the country where they had more freedom and didn't have to be worried about being physically hidden all the time. And in other cases, you did have instances where some people were then adopted out. And yeah, I'm in contact with someone right now who had that experience in her family. And it's really fascinating to hear how these people had what they had to do to survive.
It's amazing. That's the thing. There's a ton of World War II fiction out there. I call it fiction, but you know what I mean, historical fiction. So they're true stories, and we're seeing them all from so many different perspectives. I said that before. Like I have not seen it from the Netherlands perspective before, and I have not seen it from the certain characters. And I love being able to step back and get more of the feel of what happened. And I think that's I don't know. Sometimes I think there's an awful lot of World War II books out there, but I think that's why. I think there's just so much we can take in and see and experience that's not just the straight ahead stuff that we know. So I enjoyed your book very much. And just as I enjoyed your first one, but I'm looking forward to hearing what people say because it's beautifully written. Thank you very much for being here today and chatting with us. And everybody, go pick up this book, The Dutch Orphan by Ellen Keefe. Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Take care. Bye
Thanks.
bye.